So, let me just get the, all right. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Happy Thursday night. Tonight, we actually have a super guest, Hamza Khan, and he's a political strategist and political activist based in Washington, in the Washington metro area, and he lives in Potomac, Maryland. And he's actually a founder of the Pluralism Project and many other things he does politically. And but tonight we're not going to talk politics. Right? He's going to talk coffee. And everybody, I said that he is a coffee connoisseur. So so I want you to, I don't know what if everybody has a coffee mug in front of them, decaf or caffeinated, but there you go. So enjoy, and this will be recorded. And we have plenty of time for questions, and hopefully we'll ask Hamza to come back and talk some more about some other of the favorite things that he likes. So thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me, Tammy. Can everyone hear me? Just give me a thumbs up on screen if you can hear me, okay? Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. Like Tammy said, my name is Hamza Khan. I'm going to tell you all a fun story. So Hamza means lion in Old Arabic, and Khan means king or king emperor. So my full name means Lion King. And so a lot of people over the years have called me Simba as a nickname. So that's my first fun story about me. And as you can see, we're going to be talking about coffee today. And what's interesting about coffee is that I didn't start drinking the black brew of life until I was about 25 or 26 years old. And it really helps when you're working long hours on campaigns and you're dealing with all kind of crazy shenanigans on the Hill. You're about to go Michigana. Coffee really saves the day. Today alone, I've actually only had 2 cups of coffee, but those 2 cups of coffee have helped me negotiate all kinds of things that if Tammy wants me back, we can talk about what I was up to all day, because it's quite an adventure of a story. So with that, let's get going. And give me a thumbs up if you can see the discussion about coffee is what's in front of you right now. Okay, great. All right, let's get on with it. So let's talk about the history of coffee for a second. So the actual coffee bean, right, and the coffee plant and the fruit from the coffee was discovered about 3,000 years ago. People were very familiar with what it was. They were aware that it made people very hyper and energetic, but it wasn't actually consumed as a drink until about 1200 CE. And while the beans were, again, discovered as fruit berries in Ethiopia, the first people to brew it were actually in Yemen, which is across the Red Sea. And the reason this matters is because why they brewed it. Coffee began as a drink for religious Muslims and religious Jews in Yemen to stay up all night davening or praying. And that was actually how it first came about. So if you were a religious Yemeni Jew, and remember, Yemen is also where the original kingdom of Sheba is. So when we talk about the Queen of Sheba, she came from what is today Yemen. And so for as a result, you actually have a very ancient Israelite population that lived in Yemen for many years. People don't really realize that, and it's really important to know because all of Israel's top singers happen to be of Yemeni Jewish background. There was a woman named Ofra Hazah, who's very famous in the world for her beautiful Hebrew and Arabic singing, and currently the most popular Israeli band in the world, Ewa, is a trio of beautiful Yemeni sisters who, after having successful careers in public relations, management consulting, and computer science, decided that they wanted to form a band. And as I'm noticing nexus when we talk about coffee and Yemen and the Muslim world and all of this wonderful stuff. So I just wanted to share that with you. So after being brewed, people don't realize this, the term mocha, which we use to refer to a chocolatey espresso drink today, is actually the name of the major port from which coffee was exported to the rest of the world. And that is really interesting also because the way the beans are grown in Yemen is different than in most of the world. You might be able to imagine Yemen is a very arid society, right? It's very desert. And so the beans are grown in the mountains of Yemen in the interior of the country, where as coming as cool wet air, actually it's humid wet air, is coming off the coast onto the landmass of Yemen. It comes to the mountains and it turns into beautiful clouds. And those clouds are the cloud levels right at the top of the mountains, where you have all these family collective, mostly female run plantations of coffee, very tiny operations, oftentimes less than an acre. And so instead of the coffee beans being rained upon or irrigated, it's the little droplets from the clouds that land on top of the plants and irrigate the coffee plants that way. And this has another connection to Israel, because Israel is the home of the modern drip, drip agriculture, drip irrigation system, which is designed to make sure that not a single drop of water is wasted when you are irrigating plants, especially because Israel happens to also be a fairly arid place, especially out in the Negev desert. And so what happened was that Yemeni Jews who came to Israel worked with scholars at the Technion and other top institutes like Bar-Ilan University in Israel. And that was where the concept of using drip irrigation began. And then we see its effects today, where it's actually quite literally helping prevent desertification across the world. So again, interesting tidbit about how coffee played a role in developing amazing technology that helps everybody. So like I said, it helped Muslims stay awake during Ramadan. It helped Jews throughout the year, particularly Yemeni Jews, stay up and also do davening and praying through the night. And once coffee became an exported good from Yemen to the rest of the world, it quickly grew in popularity in Europe, particularly Western Europe, in Holland and in France and in Spain, later in Italy, much later in Italy. And the reason for its popularity was that if you look at both the climates in those places, and also the fact that, it's not always very sunny and the diet was very grain-based, people would oftentimes run out of energy through halfway of the day. Carbs only get you so far. Coffee helped a lot of scientists in particular and philosophers continue their conversations. And coffee houses became a very important part of the Enlightenment period in Western Europe. So that's basically the history of coffee in a nutshell. I can go on and on about the history, but I'm going to move on to other interesting things to deal with it. So this map here, forgive me for how pixelated it is, I thought I fixed this earlier, is a map of the coffee growing regions of the world. The places that you see in Yemen are generally places where you have a strong culture of coffee going back well before colonialism. And the places that you see in red are the places where coffee culture is spread to in the long term. Sudan, Hawaii, Jamaica, Venezuela, Bolivia, South Africa, all of these places are places where coffee became nativized. It was imported for. But originally, as we talked about, coffee was discovered in Ethiopia, but it was also native to parts of India, Indonesia, Brazil, and Mexico, particularly the southern part of Mexico. And the flavoring of the coffees and the roasting of the coffees also have a lot to do with how coffee is grown. So we're going to go from the coffee regions on to the next slide here and talk about it. So now we're going to talk about the styles of coffee. So believe it or not, there are a multitude of ways of drinking a simple cup of coffee. And you're probably familiar with a couple of them, right? How many of you, Tammy, do you think we can do one or two of the polling questions right now?
I didn't put the polling questions as I figured they could use the reaction or wave their hand or through the chat.
No worries.
Yeah,
so I'm gonna open the floor for a second and see if folks can tell me about the different styles of coffee drinking they're familiar with. Does anyone want to just shout out and share the way they drink coffee or how they've seen coffee prepared? Maybe you're familiar with cafecitos out in Miami. Anyone want to share an idea too?
Miss Faye, what type of coffee do you drink?
Decaffeinated coffee. Sometimes a little espresso away from home.
Okay. That's fun. I mean, I don't drink decaf coffee, but I do love espresso. So that's the Italian style, obviously. Yeah. We're going to talk about it in a sec. Anyone else want to share any coffee stories they have?
Mr. Gianola.
A little
Yeah.
cappuccino is good.
Ah, cappuccinos are great. They are fantastic drinks. Anyone else?
Mrs. Lamb, I'm going to put you on the spot. Unmute yourself first. I'm asking. There you go.
We do a brewed pot in the morning, and then we usually do half calf because too high.
Right. Yeah, you want to keep that heart rate under control,
Exactly.
especially with the news these days, right? So,
Right about that. And
so
then
go
we
ahead.
Keurig if we're home alone and one of us wants a cup of coffee, and when we go out for dinner, sometimes I'll get a cappuccino.
Okay.
So I
How
do
are those Keurigs, Hamza? How do you rate the coffee for those?
I mean, it depends on the roast you have. It's a very interesting way. It takes the romance out of making coffee.
It does.
But at the same time, sometimes you just need that cup, right? It's like, look, I had a long day, or I'm going to have a long day, so you just need that hit, and so it's an interesting way of doing it. You said you also brew a pot in the morning. How do you brew it, on a percolating machine, or what's your
No,
what's your way of brewing?
It's a drip. It's a
The drip machine.
drip.
Okay,
It's a cone.
got it. Okay,
Right?
those are
Yeah.
interesting ways. So
Yeah.
we're going to actually end up talking about everything but drip and Keurig today. So
Well,
this is going to
Keurig
be.
is popular.
Here we go.
What was that?
The Keurig.
Keurigs
The
are popular.
individual. Yes.
Keurigs are very popular in the US. So if you look here, this is the Ethiopian traditional way of making coffee. So up here in Montgomery County, we have the largest Ethiopian population in the country, in the DC region. And so we have a lot of people who brought their traditional brewing methods with them from Ethiopia to the US. And we call this style of coffee preparation bunna, right? And bunna is actually the name for the coffee ceremony. So they actually have a whole ceremony when you serve coffee in Ethiopia. People will come over and they'll have these tiny little cups of very strong coffee that are freshly ground and freshly roasted. You see the fire right here? That literally is a fire that folks would make their own coffee in. And you can see to the right, they've got this special pot in which they brew the coffee, prepare it, and then share it. And when they have a coffee ceremony in Ethiopia, and even here in the US, when Ethiopians get together here, and I've had the privilege of going to a few, it's not like a couple of people. They have quite a few people show up for these ceremonies. And what's beautiful about it is that it's a very powerful way for communities to stay together, especially in the modern era. People don't have a lot of time to hang out. So the Buna ceremony, the coffee ceremony, is really important to Ethiopian culture, so that families, tribes, and villages actually make sure to make time for one another. It happens at any given time of day. It's not like it's assigned to Sunday or Saturday or anything like that. People just drop on by. They talk about their kids. They complain about how the grandkids moved away to the city and don't spend time with the grandparents anymore. They talk about their lives. They recall the old days. They love reciting poetry. Ethiopians absolutely adore reciting poetry. So they recite poetry in their local languages. They have over 34 languages in Ethiopia, believe it or not. So there's a lot to share there. And sometimes they'll even talk about politics, though they really don't like doing that over coffee. If you can imagine, you have coffee and then you're amped up, because in these tiny little cups of coffee, that's probably equal to about 4 cups of American coffee, believe it or not. Now, Ethiopians favor dark roasts in particular, which means that if you look at how the rudimentary style of roasting one's coffee, they put it in a pot or a pan, a flat pan, and then they start shaking it, slowly roasting the beans on top of the fire. But they can't control the heat of the flame. As a result, Ethiopians ended up having a much darker, smokier roast than was really what was popular in America until like the modern era, like in the 1990s. So that's the Ethiopian style of making coffee. And it's after the Yemeni style, it's the original one. Okay, so
I had coffee in Tel Aviv. It was like drinking mud.
we're gonna get to that one. We're gonna get to that. And it's funny you say that. I was just talking to some friends from Tel Aviv earlier today, and we were talking about getting coffee when I come out there. All right, so Yemeni coffee. Like I said, I'm a big fan of this. Yemeni coffee is the Hawaiian coffee. The beans from Hawaii and Yemen are the highest quality in the world because they both have this drip irrigation. Both in Hawaii, it's the mountains that, for the most part, help irrigate them. And so the mountain clouds help irrigate them. And then in Yemen, it's exclusively mountain clouds that irrigate the coffee beans. And so as a, what ends up happening is that Yemeni coffee can cost as much as $50 a pound. That's how expensive it is, right? And so you have to be a serious lover of coffee. You have to be basically a coffee connoisseur to the level of a wine connoisseur if you want to get a properly well done bag of coffee beans from Yemen. The Yemenis prefer to have a medium to dark roast. You can see how light they are here. Sometimes they'll have a light roast as well. And the reason is because they want to preserve the true flavors of the coffee. And that is called kahwa down here. Now, kisher is actually a brewing of the coffee with the coffee husk, right? So it's a whole plant, a whole fruit. They'll brew that instead and make a very powerful drink that includes a number of spices. Sometimes ginger and cardamom are added, fresh ginger and cardamom are added, and then on top of that, sugar. And it's always served after a meal. You generally don't see people like downing this stuff at like 4 a.m. It's more to help digest the meal. And kahwa is basically what you had the mud in Tel Aviv, the thick mud coffee, with the difference that they sift it the proper way before they prepare the coffee so that you don't taste the mud. Instead, you end up having a very smooth drink with very little acid. That's why people love Yemeni coffee so much. The acidity is generally very, very low. So that is the Yemeni style of making coffee. Any questions before I go on? Okay, keep going then. So now we're going to talk about the Omani style. So Yemen and Oman are next to each other on the Arabian Peninsula. Yemen is a country in the southeast of the peninsula, which is going through a lot of hardship right now. And then Oman is a country towards the southeast of the country, so southwest and southeast of the Arabian Peninsula, excuse me. Oman has a very different way of making coffee than basically everyone else in the Arab world. The reason for this is because you probably would have heard of a guy named Sinbad the Sailor. Well, Sinbad the Sailor happened to be from Oman. And as a result, you have a culture that's really committed to sailing. The Omanis built an amazing sailing empire and non-piracy based trade empire because of the fact that they have a really amazing coastline with some really deep ports. And so in traveling the world after being exposed to both Ethiopian coffee and their Yemeni neighbors in their coffee, the Omanis helped popularize coffee across the world. There were very few Yemeni sailors, so even though everything was coming out of the port of Mocha in Yemen, it was mostly Omanis who were subcontracted to take it out on their sailing ships, including Sinbad. And so what comes out of this culture is that when you interact with the whole world, and Omani culture is actually very well known for its pluralism, for its bringing in of flavors of Africa, for its bringing in of flavors of India and Pakistan and Turkey and the rest of the region, even Iranian flavors, into their greater cuisine and their way of life, you come up with a very beautiful way of making coffee. And so how the Omanis prepare their coffee, as you can see these beautiful beans right here up here, they are dark roast, right? But the way they do it is that they focus on adding a number of spices and herbs in order to produce a very beautiful flavor along with sugar. Never milk. You might notice none of these cultures add cream to their coffee. They just don't do it. One, because it's hard to get a cow out there, and then you don't want to add camel's milk. Take it from me. You don't want to add goat's milk either. And then separate from that, the challenge is that why should they ruin a wonderful cup of coffee by adding cream? They believe that it has its own sacred deliciousness. So the Omanis will start with rose water. Then they'll add green and black cardamom. They'll add some dried ginger, and sometimes they'll also add, sometimes they'll also add one or two other light herbs from Persian background. Sometimes they'll ground in a little bit of saffron as well, I've been told. Then they'll add candied sugar, mix it into a strong cup of almost mud-like coffee. But look right here. I've been spotlighted. The video's been spotlighted. Can you guys still see my screen, or am I now the person everybody's looking at?
No, they can still see your screen if I spotlight you.
Okay, great. Awesome. I'll keep going then. So if you
That way
look,
people
can you see my cursor, by the way, with my little mouse moving around here? Yeah. Okay. So you look at the coffee for a second, right? It is a little bit lighter. It almost looks like a tea, right? That's going on here. The reason for that is that they increase the water content in the coffee alongside the rose water, right? So that it has a much more bolder and delicious flavor going on, but at the same time, it's just it's not as thick as the Arabic coffee or Turkish coffee that you had in Tel Aviv. So that is their way of doing it, and there's always ceremony. They borrowed from the Ethiopians as well to make sure that the serving of coffee, just like their Yemeni friends next door, has ceremony and purpose and love attached to it. If the family invites you over for tea, they're just being polite. If they invite you over for coffee, that means they really like you. Think about how animated you get after such a cup of coffee. It means that you're going to be sticking around for a while to have conversation with them. Maybe they want you to marry their daughter. Who knows? So that is the beauty of the Omani style of coffee. It frankly is my favorite. I always have it without any sugar. I'll just do everything else that the Omanis will do. So let's go on to the next slide. Okay, Turkish style. This is the mud. This is where it gets fun. All right, so the Turks came across coffee after they built a massive empire of conquest across the Muslim world. And it wasn't the Ottoman Turks, rather, it was the Seljuk Turks who first conquered the Muslim world. And so they also had an experience with the Arab world as coffee was developing in the 1200s. About in the 1300s is when the Ottomans begin to emerge, and in the 1400s, you see the emergence of modern Turkish culture and modern Turkish coffee making. But let's look here at the sieve, the ibrik, as we say in Arabic, the copper device or pot that we make coffee in for the Turkish style. And Turkish style is very close to just general Arabic style, and also what you have in Israel is really a product of the Ottoman period, so it's the same thing. The way it is made, as we say in Turkish, darker than hell, sweeter than heaven, right? So they love adding sugar to their coffee. It's a big thing. They make it as dark as possible. You have to use a very fine ground, an extremely fine ground, finer than espresso, in order to make this correctly. And on top of that, the reason you use this interestingly shaped pot is because originally you would make Turkish coffee directly in the boiling hot sun in the sand. You wouldn't make a fire. You'd put the coffee and water directly into this little pot up here. You'd put it into the sand, and you would let the sand, the baking hot sand of the Arabian desert, help you make coffee over the course of 5 to 10 minutes. And then you would pour it out. And now, is there ceremony in how the Turks serve their coffee? Yes and no. In terms of when you would drink Turkish coffee in Turkey, you drink it on special occasions where you need the energy to keep going. That means a party, that means a wedding, that means when you get to hang out with your friends at a shisha bar after not seeing people for a while. That means at Nakika, which is essentially it's a Turkish style bar mitzvah for a Muslim boy who turns 13. But instead of going up to the bima, at 13 out in the villages. So for that, you're gonna need some, we don't drink a lot in the Muslim world, right? So you're gonna need some coffee after that to make a man out of you. That's when you might have a shot of Turkish coffee as well. It's often served, as you see in the background here, it's often served in very beautiful and ornate structures. You might have a very thick cup inside of which is inside of a silver holding cup. And you will always have it with sweets. It's very rare that a person doesn't have something sweet on the side with it. It's not as common to have it with a meal. It's kind of its own thing. It's got its own feel to it in Turkish culture. So that's how you have Turkish style. Any questions, folks? Okay, we'll keep going then. All right, Italian style. Now, Italian style is, let's just talk about espresso here. This is a traditional espresso making machine right here. You just put the coffee in, it's stuck here in the middle, and then hot water comes through, and through a sieve, it creates a delicious espresso up here. This is essentially, to put it simply, the Italians had a lot of time with the Turks, who happened to be their general eastern neighbor. Basically, everything east of Italy was once part of the Ottoman Empire at some point or another. To the south, across the water, they had a bunch of Arabs, North African Arabs, but still Arabs. And as a result, they had also the same style of coffee we just saw. Both of them had the thick mud-like coffee. The challenge for the Italians were that they didn't really want that. And so they kind of just ignored coffee culture until the decision to invade Ethiopia, which happened under Il Duce, the person we all know as Mussolini. And Mussolini's decision to invade Ethiopia was because he wanted to create a neo-Roman empire. In doing so, and he also invaded Libya. In doing so, invading Libya and Ethiopia, Italians came across coffee all over again. Finding the style of coffee in both places to be a bit much in terms of the thick mud, Italians decided to go ahead and create this contraption here and make coffee in that way. And so that's how you have the modern espresso that comes into play. I think we all know how espresso is drank. You make it, you add a little bit of sugar to it, and then oftentimes you have a sweet on the side and a cup of water as well. Is traditional in I think the northern part of Italy and through much of Europe. The Viennese, the Austrians in particular, always have seltzer water or cold water on the side while drinking a black cup of coffee. So that's how folks in Europe do it. You tell the Middle Easterners to do that, and they go, "Why? I mean, we have water all the time. We want to enjoy the coffee by itself." So that is the Italian style of having it. And that is where basically espresso culture comes from in a lot of ways. And it helps a lot that Italians, I mean, oftentimes have probably the best desserts in Europe and best pastries in Europe. And that means that you have a lot of really interesting ways to pair a cup of espresso with something sweet that goes well with it and balance the flavors. Now, we all know about the different espresso drinks. You've got cappuccinos, you've got lattes and whatnot. This is where you see cream added to coffee. You don't see cream added to coffee in any other society that we've talked about traditionally yet. It's when you get to Italy and you get to Europe, not even the French do it that much, really the Italians and the Brits and do it a lot. You add milk to coffee. And that adding of cream is partially because you have a lot of cows. You have access to dairy milk. And also because of the style of cuisine you have in Italy and in the UK, cream and milk are heavily favored. Whereas in other societies, they just want to taste the truth of the coffee. They don't want to dilute the purity of the coffee by adding something white to it just so it tastes different and frothy. They think it's great on its own. So that is the story of the Italian style. Now let's talk about the roasts here. You got light roast, medium roast, dark roast, you got espresso roast, you got Turkish and Arabic roast, you got French roast. Generally speaking, Ethiopian coffee is dark roast. Turkish and Arabic roast is a specialty roast, and it depends on what part of Turkey and the Arab world you are about how the beans will be roasted. Oftentimes they're roasted on the spot. Same thing is true with Ethiopian beans, which we talked about earlier at dark roast. Medium roasts are in most of Europe, and slowly but surely dark roasts have been coming in as part of just the changing of cultures. Light roasts are favored by Americans, at least until recently. When I say Americans, I mean generally Americans who are baby boomer and older would have drank light roasts for most of their lives if they were coffee drinkers. When you saw those commercials in the 80s and 90s on TV that said, America runs on Dunkin', that was light roast. You would go in and get a light roast. Light roast actually has the most amount of caffeine out of all the different roasts. And it has mostly citrusy flavors, and sometimes they're very acidic as well. With the introduction of Seattle's coffee culture and Silicon Valley's coffee culture in the 80s, like late 80s, early 90s into 2000s, you had a lot of people of very diverse backgrounds converge in Silicon Valley, and you had Silicon Valley types and business types go across the world to conduct business. That's when Americans started getting a lot more dark roast into our culture, because you were going to societies that drink dark roast. And then French roast is kind of a medium between a medium roast in America and a dark roast in Europe. It's kind of like a medium dark roast. So those are our different types of roasted coffee. Okay, so we actually have a bit of time if folks want to ask questions about our coffee and about drinking coffee, or we can just have an open conversation about all of this. I believe that you would like to speak, Faye. Let me go ahead and see if we can help you unmute. Is that possible, Tam?
Yep. She knows how to unmute. I just asked her. There you go.
I didn't hear what the gentleman said about the French roast. What type of coffee would that be compared to others?
It's a medium. It's like you take medium and dark. It's between the two of them for the most part.
Mm-hmm. Oh.
Yeah. And then European roast, I mean, a European roast of coffee is like even darker than that, but not a full dark roast. If we assume dark roast is what you have in Ethiopia, it's like a shade or so less than that.
So you would say the Arabic roasts are preferable, is that it?
If you ask me, I actually like medium roast the most.
Oh, maybe.
Yeah.
What do you drink?
I think you can make a really good Arabic coffee with a medium roast, and you don't have to go all dark. It's really hard in the US to get a really good dark roast because, we don't grow coffee here except for Hawaii. So we got to depend on the beans coming in from somewhere else. And in the process, they could begin to deteriorate in quality. That's oftentimes a challenge for American coffee drinkers.
Do you ever mix the roast?
Yeah, all the time.
Sure.
I'm drinking a bunch of light roast right now out of Oregon. And so I'm mixing the light roast with this dark roast a friend brought me back from Yemen to kind of get like the mixture of the tastes. I do that all the time. You should mix it around and see what makes you happy.
Yeah. I do that every time I get bored with one specific one.
Yeah. Okay. We're on the same page.
Yeah. Hamza. So now you talked about espresso. Now it's funny, when I used to work in an Italian restaurant, I mean, is it just like concentrated coffee? I mean, what is actually like espresso?
Yeah.
You jump it in and you put it in and then it comes out for a cappuccino. What is it? Just bunched up coffee?
It's really just super. I mean, the Italians just really didn't like the whole process of waiting like 10 minutes for your Turkish coffee to come out. They didn't like the muddiness of the Arabic coffee. They weren't a big fan of having to like roast the beans yourself and stick it into an Ethiopian pot and heat it up. So they came up with espresso. And like, it's espresso, it's fast. So, I mean, with the modern day machines, the whole idea is that you get a good amount of caffeine in a really small cup, and you get it fast without any of the hassle of having grainy aftertaste from a Turkish coffee or it tasting like mud or anything like that. So it's just super concentrated coffee, but it's delicious, right? I mean, it's really tasty if it's done right. A lot of the challenge in America is that if you ever have espresso and you go, oh, I'm having heartburn, it's because the coffee beans have been allowed to begin to deteriorate. Like they've not had them for like a week or something lying there. They've had them for months, right? And as anything sits around for months, it begins to rot. It gets a little bit older. That's why people don't like it's just to have like a really milky, sugary drink. If they're looking to actually drink coffee, they might very well just buy their own espresso machine and do it at home just so it's fresh.
On the espresso as well.
What was that?
I have that exact coffee maker up in my kitchen cabinet right now.
Okay.
And my family, after holiday dinners, my aunt would go around and the question would be black or brown, black or brown, black or brown. And of course, black was espresso versus
Right.
traditional coffee. But this might be a sacrilege to a coffee purist. But there were times when she would put a bit of an orange skin or
That's sacrilege.
skin, or a cinnamon stick. I mean, not necessarily altogether, but she kind of modified, or I guess in her opinion, enhanced the flavor.
Where is she from originally, your mom?
Well, my mom is from Bari in Italy.
Okay.
Well, actually, these are my grandparents and my first and my godmother. But
Okay.
half the family was from Sicily. The other half
Yeah.
was from Bari. But yeah, so she would go around black or brown, and it was always served with sweets. And then, of course, they passed around the anisette bottle. We didn't use sugar, out of a sugar bowl, but anisette certainly brings a lot of sweetness. And
So, yeah, I was going to say, that's not sacrilege at all. I mean, Bahrain and Qatar do have their own coffee culture, and then the use of citrus would have come from the Persians right across the way, right? Because the Persians add bergamot to their tea, which is a citrus fruit. So the adding of an orange peel would be very much in line with the cross-cultural pollination between those two societies over the last couple hundred years. So I think that's very typical. Cinnamon would have come into the play after Indonesia reestablished contact with the Muslim world after being on its own for a bit. And that would have been probably in the 1600s. And that also fits for both Persian flavoring and for that Gulf region. If you're following traditional Gulf culture, not like crazy Dubai, let's build a big building culture, but traditional Bedouin culture. Yeah, I can see both of those being used. They fit.
Still on espresso, and I'm sure you've been to Italy many times. Cappuccino is generally very, very acceptable and the desired drink for breakfast.
Makes sense.
But the true Italians don't believe that you should be drinking a cappuccino. Cappuccino anytime after breakfast.
So think of it like this: when you add milk to it, and you make it so heavy, right, with the cream and the froth, that fits with something you would have as a breakfast, almost like in the UK. It used to be people would actually have beers at pubs for breakfast because you're having like a loaf of bread. You're adding something really heavy into your stomach to get you through the day. So, I mean, a cup of coffee would oftentimes be cheaper than anything except for a loaf of bread. And the Italians love their bread, but they have like 55 different versions of both bread and pasta. So that makes sense. I can see that happening. I've actually never had the opportunity to go to Italy myself. I've been all over Europe, just not to Italy for whatever reason. Yeah.
So, Hamza, Mrs. Lamb, sorry. Oh, you have to unmute yourself, Sue.
Is it true?
Beans ground. How long should you keep them?
Say again.
Once you grind coffee beans,
Oh, okay.
how long should you keep them and where should you store them?
So this is like a point of contention. The reason is because the scientists say one thing and then the cultures say another thing. And I just kind of shrug and go, okay. Generally speaking, in terms of science, you want to avoid grinding your beans as long as you can. And the closer you are to the roast date, the closer you will be to your beans not, going bad. I grind my coffee every single day. My friends who are Arab, they don't have the luxury of grinding the coffee every single day because there's a very fine ground. And to achieve that fine ground, you have to, literally beat the coffee to death. You could use a machine, but I mean, again, it'll take a bit. And to use a machine in your home, it's going to make a lot of noise to get it that fine. So what they generally do is that they generally buy vacuum packed Turkish coffee or Arabic coffee, and they insist on, after they open it, in putting it in a vacuum packed Ziploc and sticking it in the freezer as soon as possible and keeping it in there. So in your case, after you grind it, I would say you're fine putting it into like a vacuum pack or vacuum sealed, tin or something and putting it in your fridge. I wouldn't go longer than a week though, if you want to maintain the true freshness of the coffee. That would be my idea.
But the freezer's okay.
The freezer is fine. I mean, scientists say it's terrible for it. This is interesting. Scientists say no, it damages the flavor and this and that. I'm like, well, isn't that really up to the taster to decide? But you can stick it in the freezer. I don't think it'll do actual damage to the taste. I think they're looking at the flavonoids at a level, at the molecular level, that actually does not bother your tongue at all. It's not dangerous for you in any way, is the best way of putting it. You're not going to get sick just because you put your coffee in the freezer.
So grind it and put it in a container and then in the refrigerator.
Yep, exactly. So if anyone there's a coffee brand called Illy. I'm going to type it in the chat. That you're familiar with Illy, right?
Yes,
So Illy gives these beautiful tins for their coffee, and they're vacuum packed at the top. You can open it and whatnot. I put my coffee, I get my beans, and I put them directly into the Illy tin because I've finished my Illy supply, and I stick it in the fridge. And it's a nice tin. It's a durable thing you can keep around for quite a while. So that would be my advice, to use that one in particular. It's fairly airtight, and in the fridge you'll be fine, or the freezer.
I remember growing up, my mom, they drink instant coffee. I mean, they were always putting that tin in the refrigerator. So how long has instant coffee been around?
Instant coffee is an American invention because we do crazy things in this country. I think it was actually invented because we wanted to make sure that the military had access to coffee. One of the problems with the modern American diet, by the way, is that a lot of our food, what came out of R&D research and development, with the idea being that we need to make sure that soldiers have enough sodium and enough fats and enough other things that are probably not good for the rest of us, so that they don't collapse while fighting a war. And so that's why you have vacuum packed dinners. That's why you have all these salty snacks and foods out there in America. And this is very well researched. I'm directly citing NPR with all of this, with National Public Radio. And so the challenge here is that instant coffee is not something I recommend you drinking. There isn't a lot of science that it's going to kill you, but I just don't think that that's real coffee. You got to talk to somebody else about it. I'm sorry, Tammy.
I don't still, but
No, you don't drink,
that's what you're gonna have if you come to my house, is because I'm gonna have instant.
I'll just bring the beans
Is
and a
it
grinder
true?
to do it.
Yeah.
Is
Is there another? So you mentioned Hawaii.
it- Call me back later. I'm on
Is there
Zoom.
another state besides Hawaii that produces coffee beans?
Florida has tried, but it hasn't worked out. Louisiana tried as well, as I recall. But Hawaii is really
Or
the place.
California?
So California is interesting. I know that they have some crop, but it's very tiny in comparison to Hawaii. And Hawaii is very tiny as well, right? A Hawaii bag of coffee is exorbitantly expensive, as is sometimes Indonesian bags of coffee, but that's for a different reason. So it's really is Hawaii is like, if we're talking about a serious industry, it's really out of that, in the US at least.
Is it true? Is it true that the French like ice cream in their coffee instead of milk or cream?
So,
Is that known as French coffee?
that is not known as French coffee. That's known as an affogato. It's a drink that's really popular in Italy, actually.
Where?
Italy.
Oh.
Yeah. Not so much the French. The French, it depends on who you ask in France. But in my experience while I was in Paris, people like their coffee black. And then they would be all philosophical while drinking it and talking about the world. It is nothing like France, but here in France, what is the meaning of life? That's basically my experience with French coffee and French pressing. I actually use a French press, not because I'm as a young kid say bougie, but simply because I like things to be simple. I like to assume that if there were a nuclear holocaust tomorrow, I could still make my coffee. And the best way to do that is either a French press or a Turkish style. The Turkish style is
Do you use coffee? Do you use cream or milk?
Yeah.
Do you use cream?
I drink it black. I drink it black with no sugar.
What is the proper way? Cream or milk?
That is, and only if you have cows, you can put milk in that.
And we got dairy cows down the road here in Maryland, but I don't add anything to my coffee. I drink it completely black. I will grind in pistachios sometimes, like when I'm
Oh.
grinding the beans,
Oh,
or I'll grind in hazelnuts, or I'll grind in cardamom, green cardamom. But I will never add anything sweet to it, to the coffee. I want it black, and I never add cream. It's got to be black for me.
Let me
All
ask
right.
you one trivia question. So, what is the country that drinks the most coffee?
Ooh, that's a good question. I
I'm
want
gonna give
everyone
you
else to try it
multiple
first.
choice. I'm gonna give you multiple. Don't Google it. I've got it right up here.
No, you're
Finland,
fine.
Sweden, Iceland, or Norway? Oh, you just muted yourself.
Pretty sure. No, I was muting myself because I thought you were gonna ask everyone and then me. But
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, whoever knows it. Finland, Sweden, Iceland, or Norway, everybody. The country that drinks the most coffee.
For me, it would
Hopefully.
just be a guess. I have no idea.
I think it's Finland. I could be wrong though.
Very good.
Yeah.
Oh,
We could, yep. They now whether or not this site is correct, but it's yes. They definitely say it's Finland. They consume the most coffee at 12.5 kilograms per person.
might be cold there.
And then yeah, it might be. So let's see. Let's try it again for everybody. So it was weird. They were talking about instant coffee. How old is instant coffee, everybody?
That
Is
I
it
don't.
100 years, 150, 200, or 250 years?
gosh.
That one I don't know since I don't drink it.
I thought that was much recent.
Yeah.
They said it was 250 years. Even in 1771, instant coffee made its debut in England that year, but it wasn't patented by the United States until 1910.
Mm.
1700s?
Of course,
1771.
Wow.
of course, the British would make the worst coffee. No offense.
Okay, and one quick other question is, what is, hang on, this was kind of cool. It was about, the name cappuccino comes from,
Don't ask me.
anybody?
Now, clueless.
All right, it's, I think these are the answers you can choose from. The drink's resemblance to the brown cowls worn by Capuchin monks, the similarity in color to the fur of Capuchin monkeys, the Italian puccino meaning light brown one, or the size of the cup in which it's commonly served.
The second one.
I think the
Second one.
cappuccino one.
Here, I'm going to show you the this thing maybe. So it says it comes from this. The drink's
Oh,
Yeah,
resemblance
the
to
second one.
brown.
But oh,
Wow, the capuchin
Mhm.
makes perfect
That-
sense.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
cool.
Yep. And then espresso literally means
Fast.
Quick, I think, right?
to speed up, to go out, forced out, or black and intense.
Black and intense.
Forced
Forced
out.
out. All right.
I can see that working.
Yeah.
Coffee was the first food to be shipped from Europe to the New World, freeze-dried, there we go again, used in Aztec religious ceremonies, roasted and ground for drinking.
It's not the last two because they used to roast chocolate and grind it as well. I'm gonna guess maybe freeze dried. Oh yeah.
Right, that's gonna haunt you tonight, everybody.
He's right.
All right, 40% of the world's coffee is produced by Africa, Brazil, Colombia, or Southeast Asia.
I love how they stick all
Colombia.
54 countries of Africa into Africa.
Right.
I'd say
I would
What do you say, Mrs. Lamb?
say Brazil.
oh,
Yeah.
Look at this.
Okay.
Okay, I don't know how to pronounce this.
Kopi Luwak.
Oh, it's beautiful. The
Yeah.
world's most
Oh
expensive
my,
coffee, up
Yeah.
to 600 per pound, is processed during a full moon, brewed only with solid gold pots, made from coffee beans, and then excreted by a Sumatran wasp.
Oh, my word.
So I know the answer to this one, but I want to see what you guys say. This one I know actually really well.
I think
I-
number 3.
the highest altitude.
That's what I
Or
would say.
what?
Number 4, or which one you guys saying?
Number 4.
Really?
Or
Say 3. It's not?
It's 3. You're right.
Seriously.
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
It is the most
Oh,
bizarre
my.
thing ever. From Indonesia. Sumatran wildcat is in Sumatra in Indonesia. I've never had it. I don't understand why it's good coffee, but they really do love
I
it.
don't want it.
oh my.
My
All right.
question is, how-
Coffee beans grow on a low spreading vine, a bush, a tree, the roots of a coffee plant.
Free,
3.
free.
Well,
Hamza?
a short tree.
It's more of a
A
bush.
bush.
A bush.
Yeah.
A bush. Takes 3 to
So-
4 years for a coffee plant to start growing fruit.
So tea can grow on a bush and a plant. Sometimes it's a tree as well, but coffee is more of a. Remember, I was talking about the fruit. So a fruit would have been coming more from a bush or a tree, but mostly a bush.
Okay, most coffees are a blend of light and dark roast, caffeine and essential oils, Arabica and Robusta beans, and African and South American beans.
You guys know? For the
One,
most
two,
part, it should be number 3.
Ta-da! All right,
So
we're gonna ask this. We're gonna ask some of these at trivia night tomorrow night. Okay, I have no idea how to pronounce this.
Ibrik.
Ibrik is a South American tool for grinding coffee beans, the Turkish word for barista, a Middle Eastern coffee house, or a long-handled copper pot for making Turkish coffee. All right, well, everybody, we should all know this, right?
We talked
Maybe
about this last night.
four.
Talked about it, right?
Unhandled copper
I
pot.
go 4.
Four.
You're right.
There we go. We were listening.
A break.
Okay, is it Arabica or Arab?
Arabica.
Arabica varieties such as Java and Mocha are named after
We talked about this too.
the plantations where they're grown, the coffee grower who developed that variety, their predominant flavorings, their ports of origin.
Think back to the first slide.
Three.
I'm gonna say flavor. Wait a minute. What is it? The plantation? 3? They're,
Must be 4.
The support.
yep.
Okay.
Who got that right? Mrs. Lowenfish. Good
Yes,
job.
I did.
Hi, welcome. All right, so 16th century Muslim rulers banned coffee because of its stimulating effects, the gambling that took place in coffee houses, the black market that sprang up in the coffee trade, or Sufi mystics who wanted coffee limited to spiritual ceremonies. I think you went over this too, didn't you?
I did.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I think it was.
Number
think it was-
4
I'm going to guess number 1. Who says 4?
or number 1? 1 or 4.
Yeah, and I didn't, even though I didn't remember.
Stimulating effects.
Yeah.
Stimulating effects. Remember
The
all the
worry
animals?
was that the simulation meant that you were getting addicted. And since anything that causes a person to be out of their mind, like to change their mind, is forbidden under Islam, hence the alcohol being forbidden, that was the logic for it.
How? Oh, we already know this. It's 250 years old. We know Finland. And let's see. Okay. What was the most popular breakfast drink before coffee became widely available? Tea, beer, water, or hot chocolate?
We talked about this too.
Tea.
Beer,
Tea.
right? Oh, tea? Anybody else want to argue?
No,
It's beer.
Oh, beer.
Remember we talked about the pub
you
house.
did mention it.
Yeah,
What
you
do
spoke about that.
See, I'm the you guys, Hamza went over all of this. All right. Which is not a benefit of drinking coffee? Reduced risk of heart disease, reduced risk of cancer, reduced risk of Alzheimer's, or reduced risk of anxiety.
Where's all of the above?
That's right.
I don't know.
Reduce, there you go.
Obviously, yeah.
Which is again, also
It's
the
risk-
most benefits from your coffee come from having it fresh, which is why you, again, get the beans roasted early. You'll go to the store, you'll see which ones are roasted, and when they're roasted, they're required to tell you what date. And grind them yourselves and have them sooner rather than later so that you can make sure you get all the benefits.
All right, so everybody, that's my little quiz show for you.
Good.
Lovely.
That brings us to the end. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so everybody have a great night. Go get that cup of decaf, Miss Faye.
Right here.
Thank you.
All right, and we'll see everybody. Well, not everybody, maybe, I don't know. We have about almost 70 people for trivia night tomorrow night. So
What time is that be?
8 o'clock in the lounge.
Okay.
Person?
All right.
Night
Pardon?
all.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you. Wonderful speaker.
Thank you.
Wonderful
It
speaker.
was great meeting you all.
Thank you very much.
Okay, bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.